Hey, good day, folks. It's Leon and Matt back again with the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast. We're going to do another question and answer episode. It's good to see the questions coming in. We have a couple here on the list today we want to cover. We have a few that we might get in nutritionalists talk about here in the very near future. So how have you been, Matt? It's been almost 2 weeks.
Doing good. It doesn't seem like that long. This time of year, things move pretty fast. So
Yeah, you got corn, all your corn in yet?
yeah, we've got it. Actually, we've had our corn in for oh about a little over 2 weeks now. So we're just trying to keep it from rotting away and trying to keep the slugs from eating it with all the wet, damp weather we've been having. So, but most of our corn looks pretty good. So yeah.
Good. I didn't see any corn yet up this way yet, but there's some beans that are peeking up. Most of the guys, there's quite a few guys actually put their beans in first up here.
Yep. Yeah, you see, a lot of guys will do that first in here too. And
Yeah.
actually some of the beans have been struggling a bit more. I don't plant any early beans myself, but with the crop scouting, we've been struggling on some of those early beans. The slugs want to eat them up pretty good with this wet weather now, but
Yeah, we've had this cool, we've a couple sunny days here and there, but it's pretty cool and wet yet.
yeah, that's what we have too. And one thing it's good for is growing grass, though. Boy,
Oh,
we're
wow.
buried with grass right now.
I need twice as many sheep as what I have right now.
Yep. Yeah.
Talking about slugs, I've been seeing a lot of them in my pasture.
Oh, really?
Up on the blades of grass, slugs and snails.
Okay.
I guess that's where I get my meningeal worm problem from.
I don't know. What would it be?
Well, the meningeal worm, doesn't it use a snail as a intermediate host or something like that? Like a
I,
deer.
yeah. Yeah, I think there is something like that. I know they come from deer, but I think there is a snail or something in there too. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Huh. I never really thought about that. But
I don't
yeah.
have too many deer in the pasture, at least not during the summer, but because my guardian dogs are out there.
Yeah.
But when the
Yeah.
sheep are in over winter, we see sheep in the pastures. I mean, not
Yeah.
sheep, deer in the
Yeah.
pastures, some, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, that'll probably bring up a question with the ninja worm thing. That's definitely a problem people see with sheep, and I guess it probably affects goats as well.
I think it can affect even alpacas and llamas and stuff, even, I believe.
Yeah. So we don't really have any good solutions other than keep the deer out of the pasture as much as you can, right?
Right. And grazing wet areas is where you're going to see more snails.
Yeah. And
But
I think it gets misdiagnosed quite a bit too. The ninja worm, it's a little hard to diagnose. So
meningeal worm.
meninja,
Yeah.
ninja worm sounds cooler.
Yeah, it does. Yep, it does.
That's why they're such a pain.
But perilous, uh, how do I say that? The symptoms are they act like they're paralyzed. That's one of
Yeah,
the symptoms anyway.
yeah,
Their legs don't work right and stuff.
yeah.
Anyway, so you're all done weaning. I just took my weaning weights on my some of my lambs out of my ewe lambs just last night.
Yeah,
Now I need to get all my NSIP data entered. When's the
yeah.
deadline? Tonight? Yes,
Monday,
last night.
yesterday, last night. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, I'm going for the next one. I want to get post weaning weights yet, and then enter all that data at once. But we did just wean our late group the other week here, so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
How many days after weaning do you usually take your post weaning weight?
Um, little over a month.
Okay.
It's they're just over 3 month old. We'll wait till the youngest ones are 3 month old usually to take post weaning weight, which is quicker than maybe you should, but we need to get it then because like we're looking at starting marketing lambs. So from
Yeah.
or lambs that were born in January, February. We're gonna start marketing them maybe even as early as next week. I need to weigh, see where my weights are at, but we got some pretty heavy lambs on there.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the last chance for post weaning weight on a lot of ours.
Yep. Good deal.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's hard to
I
believe, but
mean,
boy, the ram sales are already starting.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ohio Showcase sale was last week, and I'm
Mhm.
seeing some breeders on Production Livestock and Integrity have their sales. There's quite a few coming up here, like beginning of the month, the beginning of June, I believe.
Are those mostly fall born animals then, or would be a little early?
There is quite a few fall born, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I saw a few spring born though.
yeah. If they're doing like January or something,
Yeah,
they'd be
yep,
getting pretty big. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So your sale date is
July the 20th.
July the 20th. And yeah,
Yeah,
you were
so
right. I was getting mixed up with my dates the other day when I said
yeah.
about it overlapping with that other sale. Yeah. So what are we going to talk about today? We have
Well, you have a list there, and we'll go down through it. I always appreciate these question and answer sessions. I appreciate the questions coming in, and even just some comments we got. It gives us a feel for who our listeners are out there, and um, gives us some feedback. So keep it up.
yeah, it's great. And while we're talking about that, if you folks listening have a producer that you think would be a good one to get on, again, we're just going to say it again. Tell us about it. We'd like to hear about it. We are
Yeah,
looking for more producers to get on to have them talk about their programs and how they do things.
yeah,
And some of you guys are going to say, yeah, but I don't do anything special. Well, we don't either then.
yeah. If you're doing sheep and goats, we want to hear about it. Everybody has different ways of doing things, and even if you're pretty new to it, first year or two, there's still that perspective of a new producer that's valuable. So um, definitely interested.
Hey, that's a good segue into that first question. Different ways of doing things. Savannah goats versus Boer goats, or how do we say this? So a couple episodes back, we interviewed Stan from S. Bardi Ranch, and we talked about his Savannah goat flock, and he has a feedlot. And we talked about the fact that in his feedlot, he is taking a lot of those goats to a year, basically. And we had
Mhm.
some questions coming in as to how does this work? So let's talk about that a little bit, Matt.
Sure.
So we had a Boer goat producer ask the question on, well, it was somewhat on profitability, whether we would think it's more profitable to sell kids at 4 or 5 months old, or whether we take them, feed them out for a year, like we had talked on the interview with Stan from S. Bardi Ranch with his feedlot operation, where he is selling into a very unique market. And maybe that's something that we did not make clear in that episode. Um, there is there's a lot of different markets for your kids out there, just like there is for lambs. And Stan has a market he's been working with where they need a goat that is a year old and it's going to be a heavyweight animal.
Yeah.
And the question came in, how can that be profitable? Wouldn't you rather have a Boer kid that is up to that 80, 90 pound mark? I'm not real familiar with goats and how fast they gain, but doesn't that sound right, Matt? 80, 90 pounds, something like
Yeah,
that.
that sounds right. And I think the question was a little bit too, taking exception to the fact that we kind of poke fun at the Boer goats, and looking back to that episode, and actually just our last episode we did, we again kind of downplayed Boer goats a little bit. I don't want to leave the impression that we don't think there's any value in Boer goats at all. If I was raising goats with what I know about goats, boar goats would have a part in my program. But there is some challenges with boar goats and with grazing them. And it
Right.
sounds like this producer is doing a good job of grazing his boar goats, and we would love to have him on to talk about that sometime. And if any of you other people out there are grazing boar goats, we would like to hear about that. I think the boar goats, I mean, definitely they're the meat goat. They have the growth and all that. So we want to hear more about this.
Probably anybody that is doing grazing boars successfully is probably in a pretty intensive grazing rotational grazing system
Rotations.
of some
Yeah.
sort, because you can
Yeah.
definitely stay ahead of a lot of the parasite problems. And parasites are probably one of the biggest. If if
Which,
we if we ditch the boar goat guys, sorry guys, I think it was specifically from that viewpoint.
yeah.
They
And
will they will probably hands down outperform on growth just about anything.
in a
There's some
feedlot
savannas,
setting.
right? There's some savannas out there that are good. When it comes to weight gain, gonna be hard to beat them.
Yeah, yeah. And while we're talking on that parasite resistance, this is kind of off topic, but while we brought it up, so Penn State is doing their sheep and goat test again this year, and with a parasite test element of it. So it's going to be a weight gain and a parasite resistance test. The reason I bring it up is there is some boar goats on that test. So that's going to be really interesting to see how they perform in that. And I don't know. I'd have to go look. I don't know that there's any other goat breeds on there. I think it's just boar goats. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see how they do on the parasite resistance thing.
I'm
But
surprised there's not some Kiko breeders that have goats on there.
I think it was more because they've done this test for years. So the guys that they drew were guys that tested previously when it was just a weight gain test. So that's
Gotcha.
how they ended up with just boar goats. And I'm not 100% sure. There might be some other goats on there too, but I know there's some boar goats on
And
there.
if the test works out good, I think probably in the future we'll see some more breeds on there.
I hope so. And even with the sheep, there's some Suffolks, there's some Dorpers, and I hope they can keep those breeds coming back to test because some of the other parasite tests have pretty much gone strictly to catodons.
Right.
But I'm hoping Penn State can keep some of those other breeds coming back and using that as an improvement for their breed. So yeah, little sidebar there, but back to the question of is is faster weight gain more profitable? Basically, is what it came down to, right?
Right. Why wouldn't you have a goat, no matter what breed it is?
And
Why
I
wouldn't you
think
push it and sell it younger
mhm.
compared to
and
keeping it a year?
I think in our interview with Stan, we had actually talked a little bit how he is looking to improve his rate of gain in his doe, in his kids he's raising, his rate of gain as well as his feed conversion. Um, so he recognizes that need, but at the same time, he has this unique market that he's fulfilling right now on his feedlot side, which is where his slower gains come from. So I wouldn't say that the faster gain you have on your kids or lambs, it doesn't matter, is going to be an indicator of your overall profitability. Because if you have only 100% lamb crop, so or kid crop, so one kid per doe, and all those lambs gain at, let's say, even over a pound of gain per day, that still isn't a profitable flock. There's more to it
No.
than that. But from the perspective of when we wean those lambs or kids and they go into a feedlot or however you manage them, even if you don't wean them, the faster they gain the less money you're going to put into them. So the way I like to look at it is it costs you, let's say it costs you 25 cents per head per day just for maintenance. That's for their feed. That's for you to wake up and go out and check on them, feed them, whatever, overhead, all that. So you have that cost every day. So every day those kids are on your farm longer is going to cost you a little more. So the faster they can gain, the less feed you'll have into them. Basically, the more money you're going to make. But I would just caution people, that's only one side of the profitability picture.
Right. Well, back to your thing of 100% kid or lamb crop. I mean, there's the other aspect of pounds of lamb or pounds of kids weaned per doe per year.
Yeah.
It's, triplets technically. Some people, you could make the argument, I don't like twins. I just glad with one good lamb. Well, what if you have, I'm just going to shoot some numbers. What if you wean two 60-pound twins? It's 120 pounds of lamb weaned, or you could have an 80-pound single. I don't care if it's a 90-pound single.
Mm-hmm.
You still have more pounds of lamb to ship out the door, even though they're lighter.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it.
Yeah. And you have more lambs that you can put on feed and get them all out the door 100 pounds or whatever your target is.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe we could talk just a little bit about the difference in market. So this boar goat producer that had the question about which is better, keeping them a year, selling them at 4 or 5 months. There's a lot of different markets in the goat industry, just like in the sheep industry. There's different ethnic holidays. Stan from Esparty Ranch he's marketed into a very specific market. It's only 1 or 2 times a year where they need that heavyweight goat.
Yeah.
You really got to find your own market, decide what you want to grow those kids out for, what market you're trying to target.
Yeah. Know your market, know what your goals are, know what works for you. That's the answer nobody likes, but it's really what it comes down to. Is it varies from farm to farm.
That could take us right into another question. Mr. Yoder from Mifflinburg, PA wondered, when is the best time to wean lambs? What are the pros and cons to weaning early or later? Matt, you and I think pretty much both wean around 60 some days, when the average age of the group is about 60 days, right?
Yep. That's what I do. So pros would be, once you get to 60 days, your ewes are starting to drop off in milk production. And from a very simplistic standpoint, at that point, it's easier to put the money. The lambs will convert feed better, putting the feed right into the lambs compared to putting it into the ewes and having it go through the milk. If that makes any sense.
That's the illustration I often use. Put the feed in the lamb's mouth instead of in the ewes. It's more efficient.
So like for me and Leon's program, both of us will wean our lambs, and then our lambs will go in the barn on full feed. And they're really efficient with that feed at that point. And then those ewes can either be bred back, which is what we do and what Leon does. So they can either be bred back again, or if you're only lambing once a year, they can go out on some pretty poor quality forages. They don't need a whole lot, or even if you're in the barn, you can put them on some pretty poor quality feed. Like if we're feeding TMR ration, for open ewes like that, we can get by with feeding them about 1 pound of hay a day and about 4 or 5 pounds of corn silage a day, which is a really cheap feed. So that's kind of the advantage. I don't know if there's any others. I mean, the other one, which I kind of touched on, would be the ability to breed those ewes or does back then.
Right. for fall lambs. You're
for fall.
saying,
Well,
yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
So a lot of guys that are going to be weaning later or not even weaning at all, most of those guys are probably a forage based operation.
Yeah.
At least from what I've seen. They might lamb April through May sometime. They might let those lambs on the ewe all the way till the day they load them in a trailer and take them to the sale barn.
Yeah. One downside to think about with that is if you're going to leave your buck lambs in there for too long, you're going to have to castrate your buck lambs, or then, if they're going on 4-month-old, you better be getting it out of there or they're going to breed the ewes back. Um,
Yep.
that's one downside with waiting too long to wean.
Yeah.
Um,
And usually those guys that are waiting that long to wean are more of a lower input, like we said, forage
yeah,
based,
yeah,
and they just pull that lamb right off the ewe when it's in the fall and ship them.
yeah. And one benefit to waiting longer to wean is you don't have to worry about mastitis. The ewes will actually kind of self wean the lambs. When we're weaning at 60 days, even, there's usually some ewes that are a little shorter, like maybe as young as 6 weeks. Those ewes can be still lactating pretty hard. So then it's a little harder to dry them off, and you can have more issues with mastitis. So I think those are kind of the benefits. For us, it's just a matter of once those lambs get 60 days old, they're that big, and trying to manage them together just really becomes impractical for us. If you can wean them, now you have your ewes, you can manage separate. The lambs, like we said, can go to a feedlot and they'll be out the door in another month, month and a half. So
Yeah.
that's yeah, where I see it.
Next question, Ebersol from Pennsylvania. It's two questions. Let's touch on. He's wondering which way do Billy kids gain better, intact or weathered?
Hmm.
I think you would soon be back to this question of whether when you're weaning, are you going to let them run with your does or not?
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
we.
so. I think from most of the data that I've seen on sheep and goats, there was very little benefit to castrating them, as far as weight gain goes. And
Yeah.
especially for our lightweight markets, where they're going to be at market, by the time they're 120 pounds. Um, it I don't think there's hardly any benefit to it as far as weight gain goes, but goats might be a little different. And I think I've heard that if you're going for a heavier weight, you might start seeing some weight gain there. Some of that's probably just if they're intact, they're going to be more aggressive with just chasing each other around, that sort of thing. So if you're going for a heavier weight, there might be a slight benefit on it, but very little. It's not, I don't think it's practiced much other than to prevent the does from getting bred back. But
Right.
I'm not an expert on that.
He also wondered what fencing for grazing goats on cover crop.
Yeah.
I know
Well,
I know of some guys that are using the polywire. Maybe we should get that guy on that is doing the rotational grazing with the boar goats. Maybe he would talk to us about that. Hey, and anybody, if there's somebody out there that's grazing goats on cover crop, speak up. We'd love to hear about it.
yeah, and we did have that guy
Well,
from, was it from Washington State that
that's right.
that that sent us a message. They're grazing. I think he said not necessarily cover crops, but field crops, and they're grazing it with polywire. He'd send us a picture of his setup there. It was just had reels where he was reeling off the poly wire, and 3-strand poly wire it looked like, and they're grazing goats behind that, same as we do with sheep. I would imagine the same as with sheep, the most important part is that that poly wire is hot. But seems like it works.
It has to be hot and there has to still be feed inside it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's probably even more with goats than with sheep, is they have to be, well, I don't know. Our goats contend even with all the feed in front of them that they need.
Careful what you
They're
say
gonna
about
push
goats.
it no matter what, I think. But it can be done.
Yeah, we might have to talk to that fellow from Washington, see if he can. We should get somebody on to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that would be great. What about the young farmer that's wondering how many, he's looking to get started in sheep and wondering how many he needs to make it work, and how much he can expect to make per year. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you did. So I chatted with him some and told him that we are going to have an episode specifically on profitability coming up.
Okay, so you wanted to do
Where
that in separate.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think it'd be good to break that one down a little bit.
sure. That sounds good, because it's a loaded question, and just in a nutshell, there's no one size fits all. I usually tell guys that are starting out, look more at what are your resources and how can you maximize the resources you have. That's a good place to start, and then from there you can decide where you need to go.
And those resources can be anything from the pasture that you want to keep cleaned up to the small running shed you have,
Yeah, it could
what can
just be a barn that you can rent or use, whatever. And that's the space you have, and you're going to be buying in all your feed. The resource you have there is your time and that barn space, and I'd try to maximize that. If on the other hand, if you bought a farm and you're gonna be maybe doing some other things or working away part-time, whatever it may be. Like Leon said, how much grass do you have? That's kind of your resources, or what other feed resources you would have. Look at how you can maximize that. That's a good starting point. But I do find that most people, I'll recommend they start with, and this could obviously be a lot different, depends on who you're talking to, but most often I recommend they start with at least 30 to 50, 60 ewes, just because you need enough to make it worth your time. But you also don't, I generally don't recommend you start in with a couple hundred right away, because there is a labor and a skill requirement there. So you want enough to make it worth your time. If you start with 5 or 6, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time with them. So you want enough to make it worth your time, but not that many you that you lose everything you have, or that you just are trying to always catch up. You want some time to develop your skills and so forth, in my opinion.
right. Yep.
But we'll get into that one more in a later episode.
Then we have Mr. Stolzfus from Pennsylvania. On an earlier episode, we mentioned that a lot of people have trouble with bottle lambs bloating and dying. What causes this? That's a good one to talk about. I was in the barn this morning and we have one bottle lamb. It was a bottle lamb. It's weaned now. And that thing is just puny. It's tiny. It's half the size of its twin, little pot bellied.
Was it bottle fed or was it bucket fed?
Oh boy. It was bottle fed. Children had a lot of fun.
Yeah, you should know. You should know better.
Yep. I often say bottle lambs are every wannabe shepherd's dream and every real shepherd's nightmare. Now they have these milk machines that are, Matt, you have one of them now.
I
You're
do.
still sold on it, I suppose.
I am. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Better than buckets even.
It is, but buckets are pretty good too, though.
Yeah.
They're way better than bottles. Bottles are, I don't know. In my opinion, if you're bottle feeding a lamb, you're trying to kill them. Just get a bucket. It's a
Yeah.
free choice.
And
I
I
know
wonder,
that's,
I don't know
but
why all do they bloat?
I think I mean, for one, it's a different milk than the ewe's milk or the doe's milk. Um, but the main reason is when you're bottle feeding them, you're probably never feeding them as often as you really should. So you're feeding them large amounts at one time
Right.
versus to if they're sucking the you know, they'll go suck a little bit, go jump around a little bit, come back, suck a little bit. And that's why I promote the bucket feeding method so much. So with once we switch to buckets, I mean, we hardly lose any lambs anymore that we're bucket feeding. Versus
Yeah.
to bottle, it just seems you lose so many. And like you said, Leon, they're just kind of small and puny and they don't do well. I
I
think it's just
wonder though why. So this lamb's been weaned for probably 3 weeks. It probably only weighs maybe 20 pounds.
yeah.
I just wonder why it's on creep feed. Why can't it? I guess its gut probably is never going to be right.
It's the same as if you have a set of triplets that aren't getting the milk they should. So you wean these small, puny triplets, those things will never do well. If they don't get a good start, they don't have a chance. They're just
Yeah.
stunned. Um,
Yep.
with our bucket lambs and now our milk machine lambs, which is probably even I don't know that the lambs necessarily do better on it. I think it's just easier on our part. Um, those lambs will gain right with their counterparts. Sometimes even a little better. I mean, they do really well. And like I said, we hardly ever lose lambs that we have on the bucket or the milk machine. Once we get them started, there's a little bit of a training to getting them started. And sometimes if you had lambs that were sucking the ewe for a couple days already, sometimes it's just impossible to get them started. But if we pull them pretty early and put them on that, in a day's time, they'll be trained, and then it's just keeping that bucket full of milk.
Yep.
So I guess the reason to answer the question, the reason they bloat is probably because they're getting two large feedings of milk at one time. So as much as you can break that up, um, probably better.
Some of the best bottle lambs that I've ever had were ones that I put a message out to some friends. Hey, anybody want a bottle lamb for their children? I tell them, I'll pay for the milk replacer. When the lamb's done, when your children are tired of it, bring it back.
Yeah.
There's not really enough money in it for me to pay you $5 a day or anything to feed it. But if you want the fun for the children, want a bottle lamb over the fun period of its life, you can bring it back when it's all done. And do you know what? Those lambs are usually the nicest bottle lambs,
Really?
but they feed them oftener.
Yeah. So we have a question on rotating out of Kentucky 31 and how to do that organically, but I think we're going to cover that in a separate episode. So stay tuned for that.
So we also have another question here from Melvin from Iowa. He was wondering if we have any comments on the buffet style mineral feeding. And for some of you, if you've never heard of the buffet style mineral feeder, it's basically a mineral feeder where you let the animals pick what they want from each ingredient. So you're going to have a long trough with a lot of little different compartments. You're going to have a compartment for salt, calcium, manganese, selenium, copper, the whole 9 yards.
Mhm.
And you will give the animals free choice and they can eat however much they want. of any of those ingredients. I'm going to say there's probably, what do you say, at least a 10 to 12, maybe, I'm kind of thinking.
It depends, I think. So a lot of I think there's been some different people that have promoted this over the years, but a lot of the information or a lot of what I hear people talking about and where I read about it was Pat Kobe's book. Uh I don't even know what the name of that book is now, but I think she only had like six different ones. It wasn't as
Okay.
many as some of these that I see now. So it was basically like a feed grade lime, um, copper sulfate, I think, straight salt. Yeah, I forget what where they were, but it's basically you put a bunch of different options out there.
So
Um,
I know of several sheep producers that have tried it
yeah,
and it worked.
yeah, we did
And
it
believe
for
it
a
or
while.
not, okay. And
Yeah,
sheep will, yep, they will eat copper, believe it or not.
we we didn't really find they go after the copper, but maybe we didn't need it, according
Well,
to this concept.
well, I'm saying that when I say they eat copper, the
They
copper's
need,
there and they can lick at it and they didn't die,
right.
is where I was coming from.
Yeah, they're not going to over consume.
So what were some of the pros and cons that you saw, Matt?
Um,
Mostly
I
cons
think,
from
I
a,
mean, I think it works. But pretty much everybody that I've talked to, and this would kind of be my own experience too, is it works. The sheep seem to do well on it. Um, it's an interesting concept, but after about a year or so, you get tired of filling all these different tubs up, and most of them they don't touch. And you know, it ends up getting wet or stale or whatever, and you throw it out and you fill it up again. So it does work. I don't think it's necessary. I think if we consider a little bit the minerals our sheep need and feed a blend that has that in, that's kind of what we do now. But I guess at the same time, we still do some of this because we have our basic sheep mineral we feed. And then depends what we're grazing. If we're grazing small grains, we put dical or monocalcium out for them, and if they need it, they'll go after it. Same with if we are feeding or grazing something that know is a little low in calcium, we'll put feed grade calcium out for them, and again, if they need it, they'll go after it. But putting all those different uh like, I don't know, smaller use minerals like copper and maybe zinc, I forget what they all put out there. It's just kind of a waste of time in my opinion, but it does seem to work.
right. It'd be interesting if there's any producers out there that are currently using a buffet style mineral. If they
That
would
are really
just,
hooked on it. Put
yeah,
it that way. I know there's
somebody that
guys
likes it.
using it, but somebody that's convinced this is the thing to do. Yeah, I think that would be an interesting conversation.
It's
Uh,
not, I guess I'm with Matt. I considered trying it, but when I think of different breeding groups across the farm and having to have one of those
yeah,
buffet style feeders, I have a ram pen. The rams are over here in this paddock. Then am I going to feed them a buffet style mineral too? Um, and he already mentioned that you have all these different ingredients that you need to keep in stock.
yeah,
And buying a 50-pound bag of some of those ingredients, some of them aren't cheap.
yeah,
Then you put 2, 3 pounds, let's say, in this feeder, and I don't, maybe that's even plenty for in those compartments, but you have that bag sitting back there in your shed somewhere. It might take you 2 years to use it.
mhm,
What if it gets wet? That kind of stuff. Now, interesting
yeah.
fact is there is a place called Avalon Farms, maybe Avalon, and they
Okay,
sell very small portions
okay,
for buffet style minerals.
yeah.
Just that's something I learned about recently. that's to kind of take care of this problem of not having to buy large amounts, I guess.
Yeah.
So from the practicality standpoint, that's why I have never pursued it, I guess.
Sure.
And Matt, you already mentioned that feeding a good mineral, and I think more important than a good mineral is feeding the right mineral.
Yeah.
A mineral that has what your flock needs for your geographic location, for something that is compatible with the rest of your feeds, that complements the rest of your rations. That's the right mineral is the most important thing.
Yeah. And like with what you said, with all the different breeding groups or all the different groups on our farms, and we're probably, your typical commercial producers probably not going to have as many different groups as we do, but I find it's hard enough to keep the minerals and whatever else there that they're supposed to have, let alone the buffet style. And I think most people that use the buffet style after a while would have to admit they probably don't, um, and maybe their management's better than mine, but probably don't always keep up with it like they should with keeping the minerals out there. So um, I think, yeah, the concept works. One thing I would say is most people that promote the buffet style mineral typically have this concept of, if we do this, we won't have any sheep problems. Like, this will fix everything. They're usually pushing this idea. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of, if you feed the right minerals, the right feed, whatever, you get your program right, you're going to have a lot less problem. But where I run into an issue is a lot of these guys try to say, if you do this, man, you won't have any problems. You won't have any hoof rot. You won't have any mastitis. You won't have any, your sheep are just going to be bulletproof. And my answer to that typically is like, yeah, all that stuff helps, but the last time I checked, we're not living in the Garden of Eden anymore. And we're still going to have some issues. I think that would be the only thing is, it does, like, balancing out rations. Kind of the buffet style mineral could do the same thing for you, but it's not a bulletproof where if you give them everything you need, you won't have any other issues.
On the mineral subject, this time of year, at least in our area, we have a lot of lush green grass, and I've had the question come up probably 3-4 times in the last month. Not through the podcast, but just producers talking to me. My ewes, they're getting loose manure, and I put sodium bicarb out. I actually, in my mineral feeder, I dump sodium bicarb on the one side of the feeder and my free choice sheep mineral on the other side, and it does make a big difference. Difference. I don't fully understand what it does, but I guess it helps buffer that rumen some, helps them utilize all that lush green grass. And there's a lot of water in that forage right now.
Yeah, and that can be a concern with too lush forages, but sodium bicarb's just, man, just use it. Like, you can put it out to your ewes, you can put it to your lambs. You can have it out there year round. Once you get into summertime and you're out grazing, you probably find they won't touch it, but
Right.
if they need it, they'll take to it. And it, like you said, it definitely helps on those ewes that are out grazing lush grass. It helps tighten them up, that they're not so loose. I've seen that.
They're almost volume wise, they're eating about as much sodium bicarb as they are free choice mineral right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a neat, that sodium bicarb is just a neat little trick to use. It can really help buffer and with feed changes and things like that. It can really help.
All right, folks, that's it for today. Just a quick word on our podcast release schedule. Just wanted to let everyone know that we will be going from Instead of every Monday, we will now be doing one every 2 weeks for the time being, and we will have to see how things work out. Maybe in the winter we can change it up some more again. So thanks again, everyone, for listening. Thanks for the listener feedback. Appreciate it. And we'll see you folks in 2 weeks.